James Minor, Assistant Vice Chancellor and Senior Strategist for Academic Success and Inclusive Excellence. I've got an easy job this morning, or this afternoon, and that's simply to welcome you to the second annual Graduation Initiative Symposium. Somebody, one person clap. Maggie, was that you? Thank you. One person. For months, we've been planning for this occasion. And so it's nice to see you all here. We've got trustees in the room, university presidents, faculty members, students. And the energy is apparent. And to be together for this occasion, to be singularly focused on student success and degree completion is exciting. At the beginning of the program, rather than at the end, I want to take a moment the program, but I want to do it at the beginning. So the symposium and who the speakers ought to be and what the sessions are like. I see our AV people in the back scrambling, which is good. I want to acknowledge the magic that's required to bring us together. So the individuals who are walking around with the black polos, the black CSU polos, to make sure that every detail, including the audio, is working perfectly. But I just want to take a minute to acknowledge them. So I'm going to read their names to you, and we can give them a round of applause. But if you would do me a favor, when you see them out at the registration table or meandering about, just take a minute to stop and thank them, because they all contributed to this event in addition to whatever their regular job is. So even though we've got a graduation initiative symposium, to my knowledge, it is not in anybody's job description. So all of them contributed to us being here today. I want to start by acknowledging Dr. Sabrina Sanders, who's seated here in the front. You can give her a round of applause. Lillian Audette, Cynthia Wyatt, Sara Zaragoza, Ivy Harris, Leo Coda, Janelle Kelly, who's seated in the back there, Maricela Cervantes, and even our Executive Vice Chancellor, Lauren Blanchard, who made sure that we had space to work, we had resources that were required. So would you join me in giving each of them a round of applause? Before we go any further, I want to say hello and welcome also to our live stream audience. Last year we learned a very important lesson. It was my first year in the CSU, and I think within the first 3 or 4 weeks we were having a graduation. And says to me, "James, don't sit down." And I said, "Why? I thought I registered, for everybody to have a seat." So we're asking people from the Chancellor's office to at least wait till our guests are seated. The demand for this occasion far exceeds our capacity in this hotel. And so we've invited members from your campus, our larger CSU community, to join us via live stream. Next day and a half for the occasion. Before I introduce our Chancellor, I just want to convene as a university community to do essentially 3 things. One is to exchange new ideas. The other is to hear objective voices of thought leaders from across the country, and then to assess our progress as a system on not only graduation rates, but lots of other intermediate outcomes that are important. So just a note about our progress, I'm pleased to announce that graduation rates continue to tick up, Trustee Taylor. And as you know, for a system of our size, a 1% increase equates to more than 1,000 new degree holders. And so for 2017, I'm pleased to announce that the CSU has produced an additional 7,000 degree holders over and beyond what we produced the previous year. This is a direct result of the work that you all are doing on your campus. It is significant. Not only on the graduation rates, but also on the persistent and stubborn equity gaps that we know exist. So I invite you over the next day or so, I challenge you, not only I invite you to ask tough and honest questions. I invite you to reconsider what we might understand as conventional wisdom. And I would invite you to consider what's required for change to occur. Everybody likes change. I want us to take this occasion to honestly ask the question, what's required for change to occur on our campus? The last thing I'll mention is that I want to make it absolutely clear that this is not just about graduation rates or numerators and denominators and statistics, that this is about the 65,000 plus new students that we enroll. But I've started to go to orientation. And this year I went to a couple, and I cannot tell you, I was blown away by the optimism and the light in the eyes of young people as they're engaged in our campuses for the first time. One particular orientation program I went to invited not only the students, but their parents. And so they've got sessions for parents and they've got sessions for students, but if you talk to those young people, every single one of them expect to be successful. None of them come to us with the expectation that a year from now or 2 years from now, that they would depart without a degree and maybe dead. And so, although we're going to celebrate the gains, I want us to be clear that the graduation initiative is not just about a numerical target. It's about real students. It's about real families. And I want us to be reminded that what we do or what we fail to do has important consequences. I want to bring to the stage our Chancellor. And as I do, it's hard for me to do so without being reminded in this very moment that leadership matters. Leadership matters. I'm with a group of funders, and we were explaining to them what the graduation initiative is and what the goals are. And the Chancellor joined us for this meeting. Jeff, you remember this. And the sort of preamble for the Chancellor joining us, we were engaged in foundations about potential partnerships and funding. And so the Chancellor walks in and he's reinforcing our goals. And at one point he says to them, he looks them dead in the eye and says, and we're going to be successful. And he said it with so much conviction, I thought the next line was going to be with or without you, and I didn't want him to go there with the funders. Easy. But it was an early indication to me that his commitment to not only the graduation initiative, but the goals, but to making the operational resources available to us to go forward as a system was important to me. And it actually inspired me to get up. Community, would you please help me welcome our Chancellor?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I recall that conversation differently, James. I looked you in the eye. Let me just start with an acknowledgement of the difficulties and the horrors that so many of our faculty, staff, students, and families are enduring right now. You know, Sonoma State is closed through next week. Cal Maritime had to close today. There's conversations on other Bay Area campuses who are assessing air quality. Fairfield, a city far away, we thought, from the fires, is now being evacuated. So this is very dynamic up there, and as well as here in the Anaheim Hills, less so. But it is leading to the loss of homes, 2,000 structures and counting in the north, which the vast majority, 98%, are homes. And there are some in this room who I've spoken with today whose family members have lost homes. So we can never forget that while we are doing the business of the university, that many members in our community and the community at large in California are struggling with some pretty important things. And as this unfolds and stabilizes, we're going to try and we will find ways in which we can help these campuses and these families, these colleagues, get their bearings again. But I do want to thank you, James, for the introduction, and thank and congratulate the chief architects of the graduation initiative, Lauren Blanchard, our Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs, and James Miner, who is just up here, and Jeff Gold. They've really done really amazing work and absolutely integral to the ability to have this massive transformative effort underway at scale, the scale of the CSU. And really, though, their work would be meaningless unless those of you here from the campuses were in the room. And because of that, we are now starting to soar. So I have some more thanks in just a moment, but first let's give Lauren and Jeff and James and really the entire Academic and Student Affairs their due. We have a room full of folks from the 23 campuses, which I always remind anybody who ever wants to listen to me, which is diminishing over time, but nonetheless, I remind them that the university really exists in 23 zip codes, and our office isn't one of them. And so thank you for being here. It's the work that you as faculty, and as academic administrators, and as business administrators do each and every day to put this initiative into action. And our world-class faculty and staff are the ones really doing the heavy lifting. And you know, the proverbial spruce goose here in Long Beach is now in the air, the proverbial one, because actually it's up in Oregon currently, but nonetheless it used to be here. But I want to give a round of applause to each of you, and you can applaud yourself for your work here on the graduation initiative in the past and the commitment going forward. So it's always nerve-wracking to be up in front of all of my bosses. There's several trustees here today from throughout the state of California who really are the fiduciaries that provide us their support, their guidance, and their leadership. And to keep our spruce goose metaphor in the air, the trustees are the ones that are making our rivets flush, our engines primed, the skies are clear, and the winds are in our favor. Now, I don't know who actually wrote that. Colin. But to the trustees who are volunteers and who work day and night in between meetings to help open doors and create opportunities for us, to each of you I say thank you. And we have some students here, also the CSSA leadership. They took their time out from their busy schedules to be with us. For the students, I wonder why you're not in class, but James will write you an excuse later on, and hope to have more students at next year's symposium. But to our student leaders who've been so supportive and who bring a reality to these conversations that we otherwise wouldn't have, we want to thank you as well. So we're one of the few in the country, and you know this, that is really blazing a trail forward for ourselves in this great state of California. But in so doing, we're actually helping others across the country in higher education on how we rethink and re-engage, re-energize, refocus, really redesign our approach to a university education. And that many of our K through 12 and community college and other partners in the four-year systems, university partners, are helping us along the way, as are the business leaders, the municipal leaders, the nonprofits, who are all stakeholders of our graduates. You know, we have about 3.5 million living alumni. The vast majority, above 95%, live in California. And you've probably heard this statistic, but it's worth always focusing. In the world's sixth-sized economy, 10% of the workforce are California State University graduates. So if you ever want to never lose track of the power of the engine and the commitment of our faculty and staff, and the success of our students in powering the world's sixth-sized economy. We are leading the way. We're not alone. Take Kaiser Permanente, another higher education institution here in California. Come on. That's just a test to see if anybody's listening, and there was apparently nobody listening, so I can cut this short, James, and get back to... So the giant health institution, Kaiser Permanente, is rethinking higher education as well as they consider to build their new medical school just up the road here in Pasadena. So they're asking the question that we're all asking. If you were starting from scratch, what would you do differently? How would you build it? And let's think deeply about that question in our time today and tomorrow and the rest of the week. Because that question, what would we do, should we, can we do differently to help educate today's students and tomorrow's students, is really at the core of the graduation initiative. What can we do to take stock of our history and to respect the past successes, the best practices, learn from the experiments that turned out to be failures, but also take a second to look at the self-imposed, the self-regulated restrictions that we put on ourselves and throw them out. The "we always do it this way" isms really can get in the way of an organization of our size and importance, hold our faculty back, hold our advisors and support staff down, hold our administrators and deans down, but most importantly, some of those self-imposed, I'm trying to find the proper word, those self-imposed restrictions, most importantly, are holding our students back. And we can't allow that anymore. So in a recent interview, the Kaiser's founding dean talked about what his school is going to do differently. They're focusing on the whole student, their background, their circumstance, their prior experiences, what they've overcome, and what they've done in and out of school. They're focusing on the ability to be lifelong learners, to teach students how to acquire, assess, and deploy new information as technologies, techniques, knowledge, wisdom develops over their lifetime. They're focusing on, at Kaiser, overcoming disparities in the community, wellness, health gaps, income gaps. And they're using data analysis to identify these persistent gaps so they can develop the best strategies to obliviate them. That's Kaiser, and they're in healthcare. But it sure does sound a lot to me like what we're doing at the California State University across the 23 campuses, and I think you would agree with me. So Kaiser is going to graduate 300 students when they're fully enrolled. And without a doubt, those 300 additional physicians hopefully will practice medicine. My personal view is they ought to practice primary care in the Inland Empire and in the San Joaquin Valley. But it'll be transformative for them as a system. But let's compare those 300 to the number that James just said. Just this last year, 7,000 more bachelor's degrees into the California society. And that work is on your backs as faculty and staff on the campuses. The 7,000 baccalaureate students. We're actually rapidly approaching having our students earn 100,000 baccalaureate degrees per year. That's really going to be remarkable. But let's focus on that 7,000 just to drive the point home. 7,000 additional alumni. That's 7,000 additional families in California with now even greater earning potential. 7,000 families where now a college degree, maybe for the first time, likely for the first time, is going to be part of that family's tradition going forward. So others in that family, this current generation and future generations, will know that a college education matters. So it'll be a stimulus from that point of view. But I'll leave the hard math up to the experts, but I want to put in context a little bit about what the economics are about those 7,000. We know that from our data that a first-year student will earn will earn a degree one term sooner with our graduation initiative than otherwise would be there. So if you're on the 4.5-year plan, you'll be the 4. If you're on the 5-year plan, you'll be 4.5, right? So that's an immediate gain of $13,000 and a longer-term gain of $31,000 in cost avoidance, just graduating one term, one semester earlier. But the short and the long-term gain for transfer students is of equivalent value. So then if you go a step further and think about what the earnings over time for those 7,000 additional graduates are, we make a few assumptions. First, the average early career median salary for newly minted CSU alumni is around $47,000. Okay? That's above the national average, by the way. Now, those 7,000 additional alumni then will earn $328 million in their first year out of the CSU. $328 million. A third of $1 billion just from those 7,000 additional CSU alumni in their very first year out. Now, we also know that 10 years out, a CSU alum earns on average $83,000 a year. So in 2028, 3 years after we've had the celebratory party for the Graduation Initiative 2025, those 7,000 additional graduates in that year will be earning $583 million just in that year alone. And then paying more than $58 million into California's tax rolls. So it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier for us to go up to Sacramento and say, hey, come on. Okay? So an additional $500 million in earnings because of the graduation initiative, because of the work done by you and your colleagues. So that's transformative, that's consequential, and it's that income, as crass as the economics is, it's that income that drives the social mobility, the social ascent of our students and their families and communities, their quality of life, and the opportunities for those in that family pod currently or in the future to have more opportunity in their lives. And so while the numbers are persuasive and pervasive, it really is that issue about the social mobility that comes from those kinds of earning potentials that really are at the core of the emergence of the human soul. So when you think of us as the People's University, it's exactly right. And we're doing it through the learning environment that you have created, and it is a huge impact for the state at the macro level and for the individual at the micro level. You know, we were founded as a system 6 decades ago, and we're driven today by that still revolutionary idea that all Californians, regardless of, and you can fill in as many things as you can think of, regardless of background, circumstance, race, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, location, status, identity, the list goes on, that all folks who have the ability and willingness to do the work should have an opportunity in California to do so. That is the idea that drives us today. That is the idea that drives me every day. And I think it does you as well, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And I think over the next 2 days to listen and to learn from each other, to share ideas and to refine our most promising practices really is the order of the day. So I want to, again, welcome you and thank you for all you do for the California State University and for the people of California. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Montes. I'm a student at Cal State LA, and I'm serving as Vice President of Legislative Affairs with the Cal State Student Association. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. And on behalf of CSU students, thank you for everything you do. When I started at Cal State LA in 2011, I did not qualify for any financial aid due to somewhat unusual, but all too common circumstances. I was fortunate to have accumulated some scholarships, and I was able to afford the first year. But when the second year came around, I was struggling to afford my tuition and fees, my transit pass, my lunch, my books, my clothing, and all the other little life expenses that add up. I was forced to make a difficult decision and take some time off college. I worked a full-time job, riding my bike for 26 miles each day to work at a warehouse for minimum wage, while saving money to eventually return to my studies. 1 year turned into 2 years, and I was worried I would never come back. Eventually, I earned enough money, saved it up, and I made my way back to Cal State LA to finish my degree in political science. My story is one that is familiar for many CSU students. We work hard and really want to cross that stage. CSU students come from a variety of backgrounds, and we see that receiving an education is an opportunity to better ourselves and our future. But too often, we get stuck in a cycle of an opportunity. Our financial aid is not enough to cover our expenses. Some of us have to work more than what is recommended by national standards, and we can't fully focus on our studies. Many of us take out loans, and we end up graduating with debt. That means that we might not be able to go to grad school. We might not be able to afford a car or a house. We might not even be able to force our own children in college. Returning to finish college, I felt very privileged and lucky, and I wanted to contribute my unique perspective to important decision-making. I decided to join student government, and I learned about the graduation initiative. I'm grateful that CSU is taking proactive steps to help ensure financial needs do not force students to leave school before earning a degree. For me, access to financial aid and class availability played a crucial role to ensure I made steady progress to graduation. Financial aid made college a lot more affordable for me, and being able to take classes at times that best fitted my working schedule ensured that I could work to make a living and move closer to graduation. To talk more about college affordability, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab, Professor of Higher Education Policy and Sociology at Temple University and founder of the Wisconsin Hope Lab. Please help me welcome Dr. Goldrick-Rab.
All right, good afternoon. That was quite an introduction. I really appreciate you sharing your story. We can learn a lot from students, and it's cool to be here with Cal State, where you have almost 500,000 students. That's an amazing thing. I've been at some big institutions, UW-Madison, Temple University. You all are really big. And the scale and scope of what you can do is incredible. You know, I was looking over some numbers and I thought, how many people are there to teach all those students? There's almost 50,000 faculty and staff members working in your system. Think about the power that you have with numbers like that to change lives. I do want to talk about affordability, and I'm glad you have a lot of people, because this is a really hard problem. And it's a really important problem, because as you just heard in the circumstance of just one person, if you can't pay for it, you can't get ahead. And to be honest with you, getting ahead right now sounds like a really big goal. It's not the only goal. In fact, I would suggest from my research that for most of your students, getting ahead isn't the focus. It's just being okay. Here's a quote from a real person I call Chloe Johnson in my latest book. She's a young woman who's now 26 years old. I met her for the first time when she was 18 years old, and she was beginning at a public 2-year college to try to get an education. And when I asked her why, she didn't give me an answer about wanting to be rich and famous, or even have a nice car, or even buy a home. And she certainly didn't talk about graduate school. She told me that she needed to go to college to have a decent life. And I asked her what she meant by decent, and it became very clear very quickly that all she was really looking for was some stability. It made sense. She grew up in a small town where the paper mill had recently closed, people were laid off, her parents had gotten divorced. They were enduring what so many Americans are enduring right now: tremendous volatility, upheaval, uncertainty. We frame everything right now as either about inequality or mobility or such, but I just want you to focus on one thing. College really is one of the only ways that people can get access to a decent life. And helping them accomplish that, being the kind of institution you are that allows people to enter and helps them to graduate, it gives them that sort of access. The problem, as you know quite well, is that despite those needs, despite the clear pathway that could help them get there, many students are leaving college without degrees and I think the "and" is the really important thing now, and in debt. That's a huge change. If we go back 30 years, there were certainly people who weren't finishing college. It's not like non-completion of degrees is a new thing, but the consequences are so much bigger than they used to be. Because leaving college without a degree, it's upsetting. It might mean that you spent time that you could have otherwise spent working, but having debt on top of that, it may mean that in many ways you're moving backwards. So this is the challenge that my research team has spent looking at over the last decade. We've been trying to not only figure out how money matters for college, but I think more importantly, and more important for your work, we've been trying to figure out what we can do about it. And I think it's so much more than what we've been admitting we can do. And the conversation about how to fix it needs to go so much further than where it's currently been. So I want to give you a little bit of background and justification for that argument. And I want to ground it in what I call the new economics of college. So the old economics of college went like this. Go to college. It'll pay off. If you need to borrow money for college, well, people are getting ahead in life all around you, and we know a college degree will help you get so much further ahead that that investment will definitely be worth it. You could pretty much say that to anybody who at the time was going to college, and it would pretty much be true. And that sort of sense helped propel a movement where we moved away from grant aid and towards loans, including here in California, and we began to justify this system to ourselves. But over time, the world changed. Many things have shifted. One thing that's changed is that college prices are higher than ever, and you know that that's the thing we hear the most about. And that's, by the way, not just the sticker price. Right? I appreciate the more nuanced conversation that we're having. The sticker price is different from the price you pay after financial aid, the thing known as net price. But both of those prices are at an all-time high. But the other thing, and the thing that we don't talk as much about in higher education, is what's actually happening to our families. As I said before, they're not getting ahead like they used to. This generation may be the first to not do better than its parents. That's a very hard fact to face. That means that calculation looks different. It means we can't count on the return being there. It means there is more uncertainty. And the third part of this equation is about what's happening on the other side. There's the students, they enter the schools, and the question is, what do the schools look like? And as you all know, and yes, it's true in California, I tell people in the rest of the country that you all are struggling with this as well. They have a hard time believing it. But you aren't funded like you used to be. And that doesn't mean that we aren't spending money. You know, some folks say, well, we're just not spending a lot of money on this. If we spent more money, we would solve the problem. But it isn't just about the total amount of money. As you know, it's about the money on a per-student basis. As more and more people have gone to college, and let's be honest, as more Black and brown people have gone to college, we have watched a reduction in the per-student funding put in place to support those students and to help them succeed. It's that combination of forces that makes this so hard for students like yours. It's not just being an under-resourced student, it's about being an under-resourced student in a challenged institution. That combination. That combination, students taught us through all of our research, leads us to hear the Wu-Tang Clan playing in our heads. I didn't know this song before students told me about it. Cream is so real. This idea that cash rules everything around me, you've got to take this so seriously, because it is so serious to them. It means when you wake up in the morning, you think about cash. It means when you go to class and you try to listen to a lecture, you think about cash. It means you worry about your student debt, not just when you're doing loan counseling or when you're on your way out the door to graduation. It means you think about it every night when you're supposed to be sleeping. It literally surrounds students on a daily basis. And we forget about this. You know, I got to admit, I'm guilty of these challenges. Sometimes one's research and one's teaching don't fully integrate. One time that it didn't integrate well, it was a time I was standing up in front of students lecturing in a sociology of education course, a really scintillating class. And I'm up there, and I'm looking out at the students like I'm looking out at you, and one of them's asleep. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. At the time, I didn't have much teaching experience, and frankly, I was insulted. Am I not interesting? Is this not amazing material? I started to make assumptions, like we all do. This person's just not interested. This person's not invested in school. This person stayed out too late last night partying. After several times of watching this person fall asleep in my class. I approached her and I told her to come see me in my office hours. She sat down, she started to cry. She was terrified. She was a first-generation student in her 3rd year of college, and she'd never been to office hours. I now require it, by the way, it's not optional. What I learned from this young woman very quickly was the reason she was asleep was my class was at 8 a.m. and she got off work at 7 a.m. having worked the graveyard shift. Why was she doing this? I was perplexed. There is financial aid. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the time. You know, this is a well-funded place. Well, as she quickly explained, she didn't get as much aid as we charged. She fell short, and it pays more to work the graveyard shift. If I hadn't asked, I would have continued to just judge. And it would have been so much simpler. What was harder was to know this was the reality and to try to work with her to fix it. Since that time, I have met so many sleeping students. I know people who sleep in class because they spend the night on a couch sleeping next to their 9-year-old and he kicks too much. I know people who sleep in class because they sleep on the floor next to their father's bed and hope he doesn't step on them in the morning. I know people who sleep in class because they are exhausted and malnourished and haven't eaten. I know people who sleep in class because they spend all night stressed out about how they're going to pay the bills for the class the next day. The sleeping in class conversation has got to change. Another thing the students taught us is how incredibly vast the misunderstandings are when it comes to financial aid and our families. How many of you have heard of this fun little phrase called the expected family contribution? Yes. Maybe you've been presented with one, something you're supposed to give up. We communicate with families about their price by telling them what they are expected to do. We don't communicate with them about their needs. That FAFSA form that we tell them to fill out is full of judgments. It's a small American bureaucratic tragedy that does harm to families all over this country every day, as it fails to actually measure their real need and judge them for their inability to put in the support that they really can't offer. We have found that not only are there students who can't pay their expected family contribution, whose families can't do it, they do it instead, but there are also tons of students, and I suspect tens of thousands across your system, who are paying for their parents while they're in school, contributing to their families, because this is how families survive. People from low-income families do not get to college unless their families have effectively made ends meet successfully over time. And sharing resources is a really viable strategy. It just doesn't stop when students enter the door of college. This is a quote from a young man we met in Milwaukee. He was 19 years old, and he was telling us about his mom, and he was telling us about his younger brothers and sisters, and he explained, "I'm having trouble providing for my mom." He was using his financial aid and his work income, and yes, his student loans to do so. At times, she needs help, so I'm helping her. And yes, sometimes I think I don't want to pay for it. I mean, he totally acknowledged he needed the money for his books. She needed the refrigerator fixed so his siblings would have food to eat. This is an impossible choice because she's the reason he got to college in the first place. When money flows that direction, it affects the students. It means they're doing something they can't talk about in front of the financial aid office because they're not supposed to be allowing funds to flow that way. It means they're not telling folks who ask them, "How's it going?" what's really on their minds. We haven't made this an acceptable thing to discuss. Next challenge. How many people work their way through college? Okay, this is how we do it in America. Working your way through college, it's our pastime. It used to work. It just doesn't work anymore. And I know we've said that a lot. I know we've said, well, you'd have to work so many more hours because tuition's so much higher. I'm sure you've heard that before. But I want to point out there are so many other ways in which work doesn't work. One way It's just harder to find a job. Folks who are not in college are out there scrambling for those jobs, competing with your students who have more difficulty because they have class schedules to accommodate. Labor market didn't used to be so tight. We didn't used to know the night before if we need you. What is a student supposed to do who's on call for her shift during her class and has the choice of either missing the class that she's working so hard to pay for or losing her job by not showing up for that shift? When we look and we ask, are our students working? We have to go further. We have to ask how many jobs. We have to ask at what time of day. And we have to ask, if they're not working, are they nonetheless seeking work? We've uncovered disparities, racial disparities included, in who works during college, not because there are people who don't want to work or don't need to work or don't understand the importance of work, but because they can't get work. The labor market discrimination that affects them post-graduation is affecting them while they're in college. Another massive challenge is the minimum wage. I think you all know that the value of the Pell Grant has declined over time. The value of the minimum wage has too. That is affecting our students. It means they have to work longer hours in order to make the same amount of money. And when they fall short, it is incredibly difficult to find help. Most people who get through college access some form of help, but the kinds of help that they need to access, these students need to access, is more difficult than ever. Financial aid is incredibly inflexible. If you decide that you need another student loan so that you can quit your job, and you decide that in October, you'll be lucky if the money comes in by December. Okay? If you decide that you need to apply for food stamps, once upon a time you get CalFresh, you could do this sort of thing fairly easily without work requirements. Now there's a mammoth amount of bureaucracy and additional requirements that seem in many ways to disadvantage college students more than any other low-income person who ought to be eligible. And applications are everywhere. We have applications guarding resources that are as small as, say, and to ration our resources, we instead deter people from even getting these things because of the number of papers they have to fill out. And yes, every single day we still forget Maslow. I've been talking about basic needs security around the country. It feels a little different to do it in front of you all, because I think you know better than most. Cal State is way ahead of the rest of the country on awareness and education of the issues of food and housing insecurity. So I don't need to tell you, because your own researchers have done a fabulous job showing you, through their numbers, through their stories, that your students are going hungry and homeless. And it has real consequences. We should assume it does, but I have to admit that if you go out there and look for scientific literature on the effects of food insecurity on cognitive performance in college, you're not going to find it, because we haven't even bothered to assess it. And yet I can tell you from dozens of interviews and across multiple studies that when students don't have their basic needs secured, they really have trouble learning. This is common sense. What we might miss is the extent to which it leads them to feel like they should give up, that there's no point, because the system which told them to go to college isn't willing to help them alleviate the effects of poverty long enough so that they can actually complete their degrees. We can do better than this. If you want to graduate students at higher rates, you have to do better than this. But I also want to suggest this isn't just about graduating students. There's a moral imperative here. We want people to be whole when they graduate. We want them to be intact. And if they're being damaged by going without their needs met so that they can pay for college, they're not okay. So I want to push you to go a little further. I want to push you to think about literally redesigning each university so that money doesn't rule your students' lives. There are ways of doing this. Colleges around the country are doing this. Amarillo College in Texas would be a good one to look for. It is literally written in to everybody's job description at that college that it is their job to help alleviate students' financial constraints. And you can do it if you do it together. It's not one person's job. It's every single person's job. It's part of the mission. I'll give you a few examples. Connect every dot. When you provide emergency assistance to students, don't double down on the current financial aid system. If you're asking a student who wants to access $500 of support to first sign on the dotted line and take $5,500 of student loans, then you might be misunderstanding the challenge. We need to not only connect students to CalFresh, we need every institution in this system to accept EBT on campus. And the institutions will need resources and support in order to do that. And we need to extend our support to helping the siblings and parents of our students access benefits as well, so they don't have to draw on our students. We can bring in the community. We can work with local housing authorities so that they will provide spaces for our students in subsidized housing. We can work with transportation authorities and food banks, again, to provide that sort of support. This is happening all over the country. This one's pretty clear. Wherever you see it, eliminate it. If there is a piece of paper standing between a student and some money, try to get rid of it. The return is higher, the cost is minimal. Faculty, we have a role to play. Put on your syllabus not only your expectations for students to attend class, but put on your syllabus the resources around you that they could access if they don't have food or housing. Without that information readily present in something as serious as the syllabus, they might not know about it. It also helps you to become part of the culture of care, of letting them know that you do take this issue seriously. Your students across CSU are phenomenal, and they're leading. They're coming up with all sorts of initiatives. Part of your job as faculty and staff is to lift those things up and ask that they be given resources. And finally, I do want to urge you to advocate. There are so many things that we need right now. There's a long list on there. I would just mention one. The National School Lunch Program does a great job. It's not perfect, it's not nutritious food, but it is food. And every day it provides milk and lunch and even a backpack program to children. There is no reason it shouldn't be expanded to higher education. And I see very little reason that California couldn't start by doing that with its agriculture community while we await a receptive audience in Washington. I'm going to stop there, take your questions, and thank you so much for listening. Now, I know we're tight on time, so I don't even know how many I can take. Can I take one or two? Does that sound okay? Yes.
I'll speak loud. Dr. Goldrick-Rab, we have a question from Barbara Taylor from Twitter. And the question is, how can Cal State help those students get back in and finish what they started?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question about repatriation, essentially, right? People have left. They left under horrible circumstances sometimes, and sometimes, frankly, they left because of something very small. I'd like to see more institutions taking action to simply reach out and ask if there are any questions that they can answer and express an interest. With them, they'd say to me, I don't think anybody cares. I haven't heard from my institution since I dropped out. So I think we should just start by calling and offering to remove, for example, a hold-on account to get them re-enrolled. Any others? Is that the Twitter stream? Wow. Cool. One last question? All right. Thank you for having me.
Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Goldrick-Rab. We will now take a short break as we transition to the room next door. You'll see coffee and desserts out in the foyer. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.